Thank you and welcome to the show. The topic this morning is the story of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the story of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, Dr. RMitchell, who is the professor of history at Fisk University. And with Dr. RMitchell is Mr. Paul T. Kwami. Mr. Kwami is the director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And Dr. Mitchell and Mr. Kwami, let me welcome both of you to the show this morning.
Thank you
to
very
talk
much,
about
Doctor.
what we consider to be a very, very significant topic, the Fisk Jubilee Singers.
Right.
You know, Dr. Mitchell, what we'd like for you and Mr. Kwami to do this morning before we get started today is to talk about your background and your education and some of the things that were important in your lives in leading you to the positions that you're now in. First, we'll start with you, Dr. Mitchell, and then Mr. Kwame will give us the same kind of information, and then we'll get started with the Fisk Jubilee Singers.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Dr. Henry. Let me thank you always for the invitation. I'm a native Nashvilleian, and I'm very pleased with what you've been doing here over the years. I was educated in the Catholic and public schools of Nashville, and I was very fortunate to do my undergraduate work at Fisk. I received my master's degree at Tennessee State and my doctorate at MTSU, so I'm a Tennessee product with that too. I think most importantly, about the last 26 years now, I've been a university classroom teacher. I've been involved in lots of other things at universities, but I've never gotten away from what I think universities are truly about, and that's the classroom.
Very good. Professor Kwame, let's talk about your background as the director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers.
Well, first of all, I'm from Ghana in West Africa. I came to the U.S. and went straight to school at Fisk. I was a student there from 1983 to 1985. After that, I spent 2 more years in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I finished my master's program in music. While I was at Fisk, I was a Jubilee singer, which was, I would say, a most interesting part of my life at Fisk. After my graduate program, I came back to Nashville, and in 1994, I was invited to finish the spring semester with the Jubilee Singers, which opened the door for me to become the director. And so I've been doing that since.
And so you've been involved with the Jubilee Singers one way or the other ever since your student days at
since my student
Fisk
days.
University.
That's
Very good.
correct.
You know, Dr. Mitchell, I think you've indicated that you are indeed a Tennessean by education. Yeah. And let's have you as a historian. You're also a historian by training. And let's have you as an historian to give our audience some information about the history of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And then we'll have Professor Paul Kwame to give us some information about the types of lyrics and the music of the period. But let's talk about the history and the founding of that organization.
Well, this is a marvelous time to talk about that because this is the 125th celebration of the original Fisk Jubilee Singers. The group began, they were students at Fisk University. They were some former slaves, some the sons and daughters of former slaves. And they gathered, and the great magnet that gathered them was the possibility of education. When Fisk opened its doors in 1866, these young people came there to study. They didn't come there to be Jubilee Singers, they came there to be students. When Fisk opened its doors, it had been funded by the Freedmen's Aid Bureau. And as many of your audience knows, in the period immediately after the Civil War, there was a period of time when education was provided for the former slaves. But by 1871, that funding would dry up. The government simply no longer funded them. And the Fisk Jubilee Singers stepped in and provided for the university. Professor White, who was the school's treasurer, heard the singers, heard the young students in the evening. And the students would come together in the evening without piano, without an organ, without an instrument, and they would sing. He heard them perform melodies. White surmised that if a group could be organized and could travel and spread the songs, that the world would listen. So with some opposition, because there were some who said that young people that have to be educated didn't have time to sing. They were serious about the education of the former slaves. But with some opposition, finally President Cravath, the school's first president, allowed the group to go out. He took all the funds out of the school's treasury, leaving only $1. The group would travel, first making a tour into Chicago, a northern tour. They would go to Oberlin College. And on the Oberlin College tour, people were impressed with the young African Americans. When they made the trip to Chicago, it was during the same autumn as the Chicago Fire. And after having a record house, a record gathering, the fire would come, and the young Fisk students decided to donate all of their money they had raised to the Chicago fire victims. You know, in all of this, and I like to tell my students at Fisk, those young people were very dedicated. But of course today, Professor Kwame trains much more talented voices. But I think it was the fascination. The world had heard about these young people who were enslaved. The world questioned the place of the Negro, the African. And some of these young people as college students were out. And so significant was that original tour, which began on October 6, 1871, that at Fisk we celebrate October 6th as our Founders Day. The significance here again was that these young people demonstrated to the world that young African Americans could save their institution. They began a pattern and a practice, and almost from that, the newly formed colleges for the freedmen would all send out groups. And it's wonderful to think that a people can elevate itself. And that, I think, is the rich legacy, the continuing legacy of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. They remain today the most wonderful ambassadors that the college have for truly bright, articulate young students. And I'm always pleased to point out that most Jubilee Singers are also very excellent students. They graduate in 4 years. They aren't performers, they are students who share their gift of music with the world.
Very good. You know, Professor Kwame, as a member of the Fisk Jubilee Singers yourself, and as a person who now directs that group, let's look at some of the things that he talked about in terms of the opposition. Now, we do know that there might have been opposition to this group because singing took time away from their studies. But we also know that there was some opposition to the type of songs and the type of melodies that they sung during the period. And so let's have you, as a person who has been involved not only with the Jubilee Singers but with music itself, let's have you to talk about this kind of music and how that music fit within the area that we're talking about and the real opposition that people had to what they were doing.
Yes, as they started traveling, especially in the northern part of the United States, most people never thought that slaves, children of slaves could sing. And so in most of their concert programs, music that they sang were mainly classical types, Western type of music, with the idea that those were types of music that their audiences could more readily receive. The students themselves, the Jubilee Singers themselves, considered their own music, the spirituals, so sacred that they did not originally want to sing those songs. So in their concerts, they usually sang mostly Western music, classical music, and would throw in one or two of the spirituals as encore. In fact, it was the director, George White, who actually convinced them that the spirituals were being enjoyed, and so it would be good to increase the number of spirituals that they sang. We need to consider this, which is very important for people to know that these are people who came out of Africa, and that made a big difference in the kind of music that they sang. We know that as the slaves were captured, they left everything they had behind except their religion and their music.
Yes.
So that they came with different elements of African music, which we hear in the spirituals that we sing today. I'm rather glad that even though they ran into a lot of opposition with people calling them minstrels, black minstrels and things like that, I believe that they had faith that came out through their singing to impress upon those audiences of those days. We still experience that today. We travel and we sing at places, make people cry, make people come and express to us how much we've planted seeds in their lives. So the difference in the music continues to make a great impact on people.
You know, Professor Kwame is so correct in what he said. Once they begin to perform the spirituals, once they begin to perform those formal songs, then it seemed as though the world opened up.
There was almost a natural outgrowth of what they were supposed to do.
Yes.
Let's take this few seconds of commercial time here, gentlemen, and then we'll come back and talk about some other aspects of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And we'll be back with you following this short commercial break. Story of the Fisk Jubilee Singers.